So let's see how objects are recognized, their locations are figured out, and as mentioned, we're going to have to leave the visual cortex in order to do that. So right here at the back of the brain, the occipital lobe, we have the primary visual cortex, and we'll see that the visual cortex is divided up into numbered areas: V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, and the first one is the primary, of course, and that's where all the information from the retina lands after stopping at the lateral geniculate nucleus. So it goes here first. Remember, that's where the simple, complex, and end-stop cells are, as well as the spatial frequency cells. From there, notice that there are two pathways, so the information splits up. And there is a parvocellular system, also called the ventral stream, because it runs along the bottom of the brain here. And it's going to go to the bottom of the temporal cortex, in other words, the inferior temporal cortex. And this processing path is going to be used in identifying the object or the person that we are looking at. And it uses information provided by ganglion cells that are located in the fovea, so the high resolution, high level of detail, right? These neurons are going to have small receptive fields, so they're just looking at a little tiny part of the visual field. And as a result, they are going to be helpful in letting us notice differences and distinguish fine detail as well as color. Going up towards the top of the brain along what's called the dorsal stream, we have the magnocellular system. So if you look at that word magno, it kind of sounds big, right? And so this system relies on information from the ganglion cells that are in the periphery of the retina. They're going to have large receptive fields, so associate the large receptive fields with the magno. And they're going to be more black and white, not color coded, so they're going to be sensitive to brightness and contrast, and also movement, but no detail here, right? Not a lot of detail. Therefore, it's not a good system to figure out what we are looking at, but it's a great system for figuring out where that item is. Both these systems then meet here in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex manages information and memory while it's being used, so it's going to connect your memory of the object with your location of it. It's going to integrate information about your body and the position of your body as well as the objects while planning movements. We're going to see that the visual system is a great example of these three types of processing that the brain does on a regular basis. Modular processing, where things are done in different places, so sort of the brain is broken up into different modules that do different tasks. Hierarchical processing, where simple things get done first and then more complex processing gets done afterwards. And distributed processing, where different types of processing can be done at the same time but in different parts of the brain. An example of modular processing is how there are two areas specialized for detecting different aspects of vision. This ventral stream, that we can also think of as the parvocellular pathway, is going down here to the bottom of the temporal cortex, the inferior temporal cortex, often abbreviated IIT, and object recognition happens here. In addition, there's a specialized area called the FFA, which is the fusiform face area, that is used in recognizing individuals by their face. So that's one module specialized for recognition of objects. And there's another one specialized for detection of movement. So this is in blue here is the dorsal stream, also known as the magnocellular pathway. With large receptive fields, not good for seeing detail, but definitely good for figuring out the location of an object. And this information ends up going to the parietal cortex. So we see here the central sulcus, motor cortex here, somatosensory cortex here. And it's going to this area here of the parietal cortex, in particular the posterior parietal cortex, which is all about place, helps us figure out the location of an object in relationship to the location of our own body. And so we see examples here then of these two modules in the brain, each one specialized for a different task. Now let's take a look at hierarchical processing. A good example of that happens in the visual cortex with those feature detecting cells. So remember, there are three types of cells that detect orientation, movement, and size, right? So I'm just going to look at those three, the simple cells, complex cells, and end-stop cells. We're not going to talk about the spatial frequency cells right now. So just simple, complex, and end-stop cells. So the way that they analyze something that we're looking at, so for example, if we're looking at a flower, well, this flower has a variety of different shapes, right? So imagine that we're just sort of zeroing in on this one particular area right there. If you're looking at that, the first cell that's going to be involved is a simple cell. And the one that detects orientation will fire a lot when it detects that diagonal shape on the petal of the flower, right? Once that does its job, it sends that information then to the complex cell. And the complex cell then would take a look at that part of the petal of the flower, and maybe the wind is blowing it, and so it might move from left to right, as an example. So if it does that, then the complex cell is going to fire, telling other parts of the brain that, hey, this shape here, whatever this object ends up being, this diagonal shape is moving from left to right. And then if the wind blows the opposite direction, a different complex cell would tell it that it's moving from right to left. Once that's done, it goes to the end-stop cells, and the end-stop cell will help figure out the size. And so this happens in sequence. Simple first, then complex, then end-stop cells. And so that's an example of hierarchical processing. Example of distributed processing is seen here, where we have object recognition happening in one area and location being figured out in another area. This is called distributed processing because both these processes happen in different parts of the brain, but at the same time. The brain is multitasking in this way.